Hello everybody! I want to take some time today to talk about particle distance in Clo3D because I think this is a really important concept to understand. So what is particle distance in Clo3D? Well, first of all, you have to understand that everything in Clo3D is made up of mesh. My avatar is made up of mesh, as well as all my fabric. And my pattern pieces are all made up of mesh. So when I zoom in here, you can see mesh is made up of vertices. Everywhere where all of these lines meet are called vertices. Clo calls them particles. And the distance between these particles is the particle distance. So the lower the particle distance, the more detail I'm going to have in my final garment. And the greater the particle distance, the less detail I'll have in my final garment. So this final garment, I have it set to a particle distance of 5. Normally when you create a pattern or you bring in a pattern piece in Clo3D, it's going to be set to a particle distance of 20, which looks something like this. And you can see that I'm getting holes in my fabric. So when I go back down to a particle distance of 5, my pattern piece sorts itself out. Okay, so now we understand what particle distance is and how it works in Clo3D. Let's go into a few more details. So on these small pattern pieces, it's okay to work with a particle distance of 5 because the total amount of particles isn't that large. So if I select this pattern piece and I scroll all the way down in my property edit over here and open up miscellaneous at the bottom right here, you can see we get a total face count and a total vertex count. So we have 1763 and 930. So our computer's not having to work that hard to simulate all these particles. If, however, I had a gigantic pattern piece, let's give her a skirt real quick. So you can see that with this skirt, my simulation is working okay, but it's looking pretty blocky. You can basically see where the particles are in this. So I can go down to a lower particle distance. Let's try a particle distance of 10. And you can see there's many, many, many more particles in this gigantic rectangle than there is on this small outer cup piece right here and all the rest of my pattern pieces. So that's 10, and it's still not too bad. My computer, I have a pretty strong computer, so it's working okay. But this is where your computer is going to start to work much harder because there's so many more particles that the computer has to take into account when calculating the drape of this skirt. So if I go down to a particle distance of 5, which is what I had for my bra cup up here, and I simulate, you can see it's starting to get mushier and it's starting to get slower. But I'm getting much better detail in the drape of my gathering here. But my computer's working a lot harder to simulate all of this rectangle and all of the vertices in it. If you remember before, if we checked the total face and vertex count, we had 1763 and 930. On this gigantic rectangle, we have a face count of over 100,000 and a vertex count of over 50,000. There's so much more information that the computer has to account for when calculating the drape of the skirt. So best practice, small pattern pieces, you can go much lower in your particle distance than you can in very large pattern pieces. And if you do need more detail to be shown in larger pattern pieces, it's best to finish all of your pattern manipulation and at the very end, lower down your particle distance just so that you get the final drape without needing to manipulate what's happening in the 3D window too much. Another thing that's important to think about when you're thinking about particle distance and your mesh are internal lines. So if I draw an internal line on this mesh, you will see that the vertices all recalculate so that they end along this internal line. So that means that anytime I make a manipulation to this pattern piece, all of these vertices need to be recalculated, which will slow down your computer. So that means if you need an internal line and if you're using it for a fit or design, like you'll see along this vertical line right here, it's simulating elastic on the internal piece of my cup. So I need an internal line right there to apply elastic to it. However, if I have a line that I don't need to use for fitting purposes, I can either delete it if I don't need it, or I can convert it to a baseline if I still want it there as a reference. So to do that, you just grab that line with your edit pattern tool, right click and select convert to baseline. So now you can see that my vertices are no longer trying to find an endpoint on that line. One last thing that it's important to consider as well when you're working with your mesh are segment points. So if I add segment points along this line using my X tool, you can see that all the particles want to remesh so that they end a vertice on each segment point. So again, just like internal lines, if you don't need your segment points, you can grab them all, right click, and convert to curve points. And now anytime you want to change your pattern, Clo doesn't need to recalculate what is happening with all the mesh inside. If you like this garment and you're interested in learning how to make it, I do have a course called Clo3D Foundations for Intimate Apparel, where I teach you how to make this entire garment and other basics of using Clo3D specifically for intimates. Take care, and I hope you have a great day.